Hello and welcome to Frank Philosophy, where we speak frankly about philosophy. I'm your host, Frank, a philosopher. I have a BA, an MPhil, and a PhD in philosophy, and I teach philosophy at a university far, far away. And today we'll be going through an essay by one Mr. William James, one of the great representatives of the American pragmatist movement in philosophy. He's also, and maybe a bit more famous for his contributions to psychology. He's known as the father of modern psychology, where he also made many contributions in terms of the contemporary methodologies of empirical psychology and cognitive, the study of the mind in a rather scientific way. But he was also a pragmatist, meaning that he was a representative of a movement that was associated with an American way of thinking in the early 20th and late 19th century that was a pretty, well, I guess we could call it a radical philosophical movement that rebelled against many of the norms and traditions of philosophy as it was practiced in Europe and elsewhere, as Americans tend to, right? So this is a very American piece of writing. And it's called The Will to Believe. And the basic idea is William James wants to show a bunch of stuffy philosophers that even though there might not be any logical evidence or enough evidence that compels one logically to accept a religious belief of some sort, there is still good reason to accept religious beliefs nevertheless. Okay. Now that's the conclusion, but and you might want to, you might be tempted to tune out right now. You say, "Oh no, this is going to be a crazy religious rant. I'm tuning out. No thanks." And in fact, you might have your own counter argument for why, in fact, no, religion must be all nonsense. If there's not enough scientific basis for something, then we shouldn't believe it. And you are, if you are that sort of person, you are precisely the person who William James is arguing against. So if you are interested in having your beliefs challenged, if those are your beliefs, then I would recommend listening along. If, on the other hand, you're somebody who is already convinced of the value of religious beliefs, then, you might learn something about some of the arguments that you might have at your disposal to promote that idea as well. So there you go. Will to Believe. We're going to read through it. It's 16 pages. And it's an interesting thing. I've read it recently. It's not crazily technical, but it is in need of dissection and explanation. James is a fun writer, but he's very erudite and he likes to move very quickly through ideas. If you were to try to write like this, nowadays in philosophy, it wouldn't work. But James has diction and style, and he's, again, very erudite, and he has some fun ideas, and he expresses them kind of in an interesting way. He also likes to make up words, which our text preparer, the late Jonathan Bennett, has replaced a couple strange, I guess we can call it James-isms, with more understandable language. Okay, so yeah, strap in, get ready to learn some stuff about why we might want to accept religious beliefs, even if we don't have absolute logical proof for them. Okay, let's do it. We'll start with the introduction. And this is like the format here, I should say. You can download this edition of The Will to Believe, and it's also on Project Gutenberg, but you can download this PDF from the Early Modern Texts website that was prepared by the late Jonathan Bennett. The site is still up, and they have given me permission to use the texts prepared for that site for these videos. So I'm very grateful for them, and there's a link to this PDF down in the description. Okay. Without further ado, let's get into it. In Leslie Stephen's recently published biography of his brother, Fitzjames Stephen, there is an account of a school to which the latter went when he was a boy. The teacher used to converse with his pupils in this manner. Gurney, what is the difference between justification and sanctification? Stephen, prove the omnipotence of God, and so on. I don't know who either of these people are, I guess because I'm not very learned, but, again, James is very erudite. I'm sure you can Google these folks to figure out who they are, but they never come up again, so it doesn't really matter. Okay. In the midst of our Harvard free-thinking and don't-care attitude, we're apt to think that here, at your good old Orthodox college, conversation continues along similar lines. Okay, so part of this is that the pragmatist movement, and specifically James being at Harvard, had a geographical component to it. So the way of doing philosophy like they did at Harvard, or like James did at Harvard, was very different from the way that it was done at Brown and Yale, which you see down here. So James is talking probably to a bunch of non-pragmatists, right? So he's talking to a bunch of people who probably were less receptive to American pragmatist philosophy than would have been the case at Harvard, where presumably it was more accepted, right? So there were some geographical explanations of where certain philosophy was done, and so on at that time. Okay. Right, and he's basically calling them out. He's saying, look, all these sort of stuffy philosophical questions, I'm sure you guys still do philosophy like this, right? But we at Harvard, in our don't care attitude, we're different, right? And the goal is to show you that we at Harvard have not lost all interest in these vital subjects, right? So he's saying, like, we're not all crazy. And so I've brought with me tonight something like a sermon on justification by faith to read to you. I mean an essay on justification of faith, a defense of our right to adopt a believing attitude in religious matters, even if our merely logical intellect has not been driven to it. So the title of my paper is The Will to Believe. Okay, very good. This is great introduction, right? Great philosophical introduction, right? So he sets up. He's got a little bit of literary flourish at the beginning. He starts with a quote from a topical publication, moves on to the problem, and he says his thesis right up front, right? Last sentence of the first paragraph. That is a great spot for a thesis, right? An essay on a defense of our right to adopt a believing attitude in religious matters, even if our merely logical intellect has not been driven to it. So there you go. So the will to believe, right? I have long defended to my own students the lawfulness of freely chosen faith, right? So he's talking about, the freedom of religion in the U.S. Constitution, because, American, right? But as soon as they have become drenched in the logical spirit, most of them have refused to accept my contention as lawful. Most of them have refused to accept my contention as lawful philosophically, despite their being crammed with some faith or other themselves. I am so sure that my own position is correct that your invitation to speak to you has seemed a good occasion to make my statements more clear. Perhaps your minds will be more open than the ones I have had to deal with up to now. I will be as little technical as I can, but I must begin by setting up some technical distinctions that will eventually help us. All right, so again, this is great philosophical writing in terms of the structure. So like the actual language that he's using, the sentences are very complicated, and the verbiage, the details of the language and the sentences are not like, I wouldn't recommend you write like this. But as far as the structure goes, like set up the thesis, and the thesis being right here, front and center. And now he's going to get into some definitions that we need to understand. He's going to clarify some concepts that we need to understand the rest of the argument. So this is all like prefatory material, right? So he's setting up the terms that he's going to need to make his case later on. Okay. Let us give the label hypothesis to anything that may be proposed for us to believe. And just as electricians speak of live and dead wires, let us classify hypotheses into live and dead. A live hypothesis is one that appeals as a real possibility to the person it is proposed to. If I ask you to believe in the Mahdi, the notion makes no electrical connection with your nature. It refuses to sparkle with any credibility at all. As a hypothesis, it is completely dead. But to an Arab, even if he wasn't one of the Mahdi's followers, the hypothesis is among the mind's possibilities. It is alive. This shows that deadness and aliveness are not intrinsic properties of a hypothesis, or an hypothesis, but relations of the hypothesis to the individual thinker. They are measured by his willingness to act. The maximum of aliveness in an hypothesis means willingness to act irrevocably. But there is some believing tendency wherever there is any willingness to act. Okay, so he's connecting a lot of things here. But basically a distinction between a live hypothesis and a dead hypothesis, where the live hypothesis is something that we could conceivably, accept, whereas a dead hypothesis is one that, there's no situation under which we would accept it, right? So if I were to, is a horse and buggy the best way to get to work today? No, that's not a live option, right? That's not a live hypothesis. Okay, and just in this case, right, to believe in the Mahdi, I'm not sure, is that, maybe he's talking about Islam, I'm not sure, but either way, right, to some groups of people, it would be good to follow, or it's a live option, right, it's a live hypothesis, but for other people, like me, who have no idea what, a Mahdi is, it's not a live hypothesis. It's dead. Okay. Next, let us call the decision between two hypotheses an option. And this is why I don't want to say a live option, even though that's how we speak nowadays. But he's talking about a live hypothesis. And the decision between two hypotheses is an option. This is like unfortunate terminology because we use option as a noun, but he's using option as a decision between two hypotheses. Like, we have two options, or we have an option to make. So he means like option like decision. So it's not a very, what's the word? I don't want to say it's not helpful, but it's a little confusing. Okay. So options are of several kinds, right? They may be living or dead. They may be forced or avoidable. And they may be momentous or trivial, right? So these are the different types of options. And for our purpose, we may call something a genuine option when it is forced, living, and momentous. Okay, so now he's just still clarifying the terms. Okay. Now he'll give some more definitions to help us understand how those are supposed to work. 1. A living option is one in which both hypotheses are alive. If I say to you, be a theosophist or be a Mohammedan, it is probably a dead option, because for you, neither hypothesis is likely to be alive. But if I say be an agnostic or be a Christian, it is otherwise. Given your education, each hypothesis makes some appeal, however small, to your belief. Okay, so obviously this is because he's talking to a room full of white American guys, well, probably white, I guess, at that time. And, the idea of being a Muslim at that point in that part of the world, in that point in history, was not a live option. Now, obviously, things are very different, and especially nowadays, I'm giving this video in a global setting, right? This is not the case, but the point he's just making is that, that sometimes, when we give options to people, they can be either alive or dead, right? And a living option is one in which both hypotheses are alive. And if I give you an option in which both hypotheses are dead, then it's a dead option. Okay. 2. Next, if I say to you, choose between going out with your umbrella and going out without it. I do not offer you a genuine option, for it is not forced. You can easily avoid it by not going out at all. Similarly, if I say either love me or hate me, either call my theory true or call it false, your option is avoidable. You may remain indifferent to me, neither loving nor hating, and you may refuse to offer any judgment on my theory. But if I say either accept this truth or don't accept it, I present you with a forced option, for there is no standing place outside of the two alternatives. Every dilemma based on a complete logical disjunction, with no possibility of not choosing, is an option of this forced kind. Right, so he's saying that in some situations we have a choice to not choose, right? Where we have a false dilemma. If you've heard that term before, right? A false dilemma is when somebody says, you can either do A or B, and you say, no, I don't have to do either A or B. I could do C. I could do neither of those things. I could do both of those things, right? That's a false dilemma. But in a genuine dilemma, which sometimes does happen, we have to choose between two hypotheses, and it is a forced decision that we have to make. Stop or go in traffic, right? There's no, you're either moving or you're not moving, right? I could use some more crass examples, but I won't. Blank or get off the pot, if you've heard that before. Okay. Right. So there you go. So that's, again, so this is like, this isn't like super technical. It's just like he's telling you what to keep in mind moving forward. Like he's telling you the concept. So even if you've heard of this stuff before, this isn't revolutionary. It's not supposed to be revolutionary. It's just like telling you, like, here's our starting point. Here's our building blocks. Here's our vocabulary. Finally, if I were Dr. Nansen and I proposed to you to join my North Pole expedition, your option would be momentous. For this would probably be your only such opportunity, and your choice now would either exclude you from a North Pole sort of immortality altogether, or give you at least a chance of achieving it. Someone who refuses to accept a unique opportunity loses the prize just as surely as if he tried and failed. On the other hand, an option is trivial when the opportunity is not unique, when the stake is insignificant, or the decision is reversible if it later proves to be unwise. Such trivial options abound in scientific life. A chemist finds a hypothesis alive enough to spend a year on testing it. He believes in it to that extent. But if experiments prove inconclusive either way, his loss of time is no great matter. No vital harm is being done. Our discussion will go on better if we keep these distinctions in mind. Okay, right. So again, he's giving us a definition of different types of options, right? There's a distinction between living or dead options, forced and avoidable options, and momentous or trivial options. And he's most interested in the genuine option, which is forced, meaning you have to choose. It's living, meaning both hypotheses are alive as well. And momentous, meaning, it actually matters, right? Okay. So, to anticipate, probably he's going to try and, motivate the idea that choosing to believe in religion or not is going to meet these criteria, right? It's a living, forced, and momentous option. Okay. The next matter to consider is the actual psychology of human opinion. When we look at certain facts, it seems as if the feeling and willing side of our nature lay at the root of all our convictions. When we look at other facts, it seems as if that side of our nature could do nothing once the intellect had its say. let us take up the latter facts first. Right? So sometimes it seems like, what we feel about a situation matters to the way that it is. Other situations, the way we feel about things doesn't influence what we actually believe, or what we should believe, because once our minds figure something out, it becomes impossible for us to believe what isn't true. Okay, so let's and he's gonna focus on those first, the latter facts first, right? Doesn't it seem preposterous on the face of it to talk of our opinions being modifiable at will? Can our will help or hinder our intellect in its perceptions of truth? Can we, by just willing it, believe that A, Abraham Lincoln's existence is a myth? Can we, by any effort of our will or any strength of wanting it to be true, believe that Abraham Lincoln's existence is a myth? We are all well and going about our business when we are actually in a bed and screaming at the pain of rheumatism. Right? All right, maybe this should be B. This might be a typo in the document. Okay, so sometimes there's like small letters in front of propositions. This is like a common thing in philosophy, to like keep track of propositions that get repeated as examples throughout a text. I think I'll just like not read those, read the letters. Okay, but regardless, the point stands, right? Can we really believe that Abraham Lincoln didn't exist? Right? Or feel certain that the sum of the two $1 bills in our pocket must be $100? Right? We could say any of these things, but we are absolutely unable to believe them. Now, keep in mind, James is writing at a time when Abraham Lincoln would have been much closer to him historically. So the idea that Abraham Lincoln didn't exist probably would have been totally impossible to believe. Where I guess like nowadays, maybe there's some conspiracy theories who believe that Abraham Lincoln didn't really exist. Maybe I'm sure somebody believes that, but probably nobody believed that in William James's time. But that's the point, right? Where if we have sufficient evidence for something, it's really impossible for us to believe the opposite, right? So we might be able to say that, the sum of the two $1 bills in our pocket must be $100, but we are absolutely unable to believe these things. And the whole fabric of the truths that we do believe in is made up of just such things: matters of fact, immediate or remote, as Hume said, and relations between ideas, which are either there or not there for us if we see them so, and which, if not there, cannot be put there by any action of our own, right? So anything we believe is, and all the truths that we think that we know are just, matters of fact or relations between ideas. And this actually comes from, classical empiricism that goes back to Hume and even before Hume and to John Locke. In Pascal's Pensées, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, probably not, there is a celebrated passage known in the literature as Pascal's wager. In it, he tries to force us into Christianity by reasoning as if our concern with truth resembled our concern with the stakes in a game of chance. Okay, so if you've ever taken an Introduction to Philosophy course, you may have come across Pascal's wager, which is an argument for the belief in Christianity specifically, or in the existence of God, here it's a starting point in William James's discussion, and it is an often maligned argument, but as James will show, and as many people nowadays, and even back then, it's not as poorly regarded as it often seems, but. I don't need to explain it yet. I'll just read ahead and you can see it. But it is famous. If you just look up Pascal's wager online, you'll find a whole bunch of stuff about it. I guess I can do a video on that. Maybe. It would be a short one. Well, here it is. Translated freely, his words are these, right? So I guess he's being fast and loose with the text. You must either believe or not believe that God exists, right? So in this way, the option is forced, right? You have to choose. God either exists or he doesn't. There's no other way. Which will you do? Your human reason cannot say. A game is going on between you and the nature of things, which at the day of judgment will come out either heads or tails. Weigh what your gains and your losses would be if you stake everything you have on heads or God's existence. If you win in such case, you gain eternal blessedness. If it comes up tails, you lose nothing at all. If there were an infinity of chances and only one for God in this wager, you still ought to stake everything on God. For though you certainly risk a finite loss by this bet, any finite loss is reasonable. Even a certain loss is reasonable if there is even the possibility of infinite gain. Go then, take holy water and have masses said. Belief will come and stupefy your scruples. Why shouldn't you? At bottom, what have you to lose? Right. So this is so that's pretty much it, right? The idea is that, look, if you do believe in God, you have the chance of receiving infinite, happiness and blessedness by going into heaven after you die, right? And the day of judgment comes. If you don't believe in God, and God exists, then that's not on the table. And in fact, you're probably going to be, condemned to an eternity of hell and, loss or whatever, right? So therefore, even if there's just a very small chance that God exists, it's you're better off, right, for your own well-being, believing in God. That is Pascal's wager, right? He's saying, look, you got to make a choice. If you're wrong and God doesn't exist, you lose nothing. But if you're wrong and God does exist, you lose a whole lot. In fact, you lose out on infinite happiness, and you might even condemn yourself to infinite suffering. And that's the wager, right? So therefore, it makes sense, it's rational for you to believe in God. Even if it's not logical, right? Even if it's not logically, empirically justifiable for you to believe in God, because it's not, right? There's no way to decide one way or the other. It's not something that reason can settle. It's a matter of faith, right? And given that situation, you're better off believing in God. Okay, so that's Pascal's wager. Lots of things to say about that. Enough for another video or a whole other discussion. But let's just follow along with William James because it does play an important role. This kind of thinking, he's going to give us reason to take it seriously and put his own little spin on it. Okay. Although his argument is not the same as Pascal's wager, just to clarify. You probably feel that when religious faith expresses itself in the language of a gaming table, it is at the end of its resources. Surely Pascal's own personal belief in masses and holy water had a source very different from this. And this celebrated page of his is only an argument for others, a last desperate snatch at a weapon against the hardness of the unbelieving heart. We feel that a faith in masses and holy water, adopted deliberately after such a mechanical calculation, would lack the inner soul of faith's reality. And if we were in the place of the deity, we would probably take particular pleasure in cutting off believers of this sort from their infinite reward. Right? Meaning, so he's basically, he's ragging on Pascal's wager as is commonly done so far, right? This is what he's doing right now. It's just as immediate. It's like, look, we look at this argument and it kind of looks ridiculous, right? And in fact, if people got to heaven and said, "Well, boy, I'm so glad I put my chips on God. I wasn't really sure. I didn't really have faith, but if I knew that if I did believe in God and you did exist, I would get my infinite reward. So isn't that great?" And William James is saying, like, probably God himself would enjoy denying those kind of believers the infinite reward. Obviously, unless there is some pre-existing tendency to believe in masses and holy water, what Pascal offers to the will is not a living option. Right? So unless you already have some idea of maybe masses and holy water, maybe the rites and beliefs of Christianity are worth taking seriously, like even at a glance, right? Even at an initial, just on the surface, it wouldn't be a live option or a living option, but it is a living option, right? Certainly no Turk ever took the masses and holy water on its account, and even to us Protestants these means of salvation seem such foregone impossibilities that Pascal's logic, invoked specifically for us, leaves us unmoved. The Mahdi might as well write to us saying, I am the expected one whom God has created in his glory. You will be infinitely happy if you accept me. Otherwise, you will be cut off from the light of the sun. Weigh then your infinite gain, if I am genuine, against your finite sacrifice if I am not. His logic would be that of Pascal, but it would be in vain to use it on us because the hypothesis he offers is dead to us. We have not the slightest tendency to act on it. Right, so this is related to a problem with Pascal's wager called the objection for the problem, or the many gods objection, or the which god objection, right? Where the idea is that there are many gods that Pascal's wager could be applied to. Which one do you pick? It seems kind of random, right? And William James is expressing this concern in the language that he's developed of having a living or an unliving option, right? And he's saying that, Pascal, in order for this to be a living option, the hypotheses need to be living, right? We need to have some initial reason to take the possibility seriously that, masses and holy water, that, the Catholic rites are worth, are even worth considering. So the talk of believing by our volition seems from one point of view to be simply silly. Right? To be simply silly, right? So it's silly, right? So he's just trashing Pascal's wager here, right? He's just trashing it. He's saying, look, it's silly because first of all, it seems desperate. Second of all, it seems like ridiculous that somebody would want to believe this way and that God would still reward us even if we did. And third of all, like the options aren't even live, right? This isn't even a live option because the hypotheses aren't living, right? We can, unless we think that, Pascal's specific conception of Christianity and Catholicism is the way to go. These aren't even, this is not it's not a living option for us to consider. Okay, so therefore it's silly. From another point of view, it is worse than silly. It is vile. When one turns to the magnificent edifice of the physical sciences and sees how it was erected, what thousands of lives, unselfish, morally decent lives of men lie buried in its mere foundations, what patience and postponement, choking down of preference, submission to the icy laws of outer fact, are built into its very stone and mortars, and how absolutely impersonal it stands in its vast majesty, then how besotted and contemptible it seems every little sentimentalist who comes blowing his voluntary smoke wreaths and pretending to decide things on the basis of his private dream. Right? So, science doesn't work this way, and science is amazing. That's basically the idea here. Right? This reverence for science and how, the scientific acceptance of belief is the way to go, right? Can we wonder if those who were brought up in the rugged and manly schools of science should feel like spewing such stuff out of their mouths? The whole system of loyalties that grow up in the schools of science are flatly opposed to tolerating such subjectivism, meaning to believing things because we want them to be true or because we think that there's going to be some reward if we do, right? That whole way of thinking that we can encourage ourselves or force ourselves to believe things because it's somehow better for us or because we want things to be a certain way is utterly unscientific, right? It's utterly unscientific. And he's giving a very, colorful defense of science to make this point. so that it's only natural that those who have caught the scientific fever should go to the opposite extreme. Oh, okay. So here we go. Here's a little twist, right? And sometimes write as if the incorruptibly truthful intellect ought positively to prefer results that are bitter and unacceptable to the heart. It fortifies my soul to know that though I perish, truth is so, sings Clough. While Huxley exclaims, my only consolation lies in the reflection that our posterity, however bad they become, won't have reached the lowest depths of immorality if they hold by that plain rule of not pretending to believe what they have no reason to believe, because it may be to their advantage so to pretend. Right, so this, he's talking about, actually, if we go back to my first video, Bertrand Russell would be on this list if he were around. I think he was alive at this time. But, you could add Russell to this list who believed that, only believe things if they are true, and if they're not true, or even if you want them to be true, don't believe them, no matter what, right? So this very scientific attitude. So Aldous Huxley claims this. I think it's Aldous Huxley who's talking about, or unless there's another Huxley. Clough, I don't know, some other guy, right? He has so many people in mind. He's a very erudite guy. And that delicious enfant terrible infant, Clifford writes the following. Here's a very, polemic quote here. Belief is desecrated when it is given to unproved and unquestioned statements for the solace and private pleasure of the believer. Anyone who wants to deserve well of his fellows in this matter will guard the purity of his belief with a very fanaticism of jealous care, lest at any time it should rest on an unworthy object and catch a stain which can never be wiped away. If a belief is accepted on insufficient evidence, even if the belief is true, the pleasure is a stolen one. It sins against our duty to mankind, which is to guard ourselves from such beliefs, as from a pestilence that could master our own body and then spread to the rest of town. It is wrong, always, everywhere, and for everyone, to believe anything upon insufficient evidence. Wow. Yeah. Okay. So, again, the idea of believing things because, we might get, an infinite reward if we do, or believing things because we want them to be true, utterly unscientific, really bad, according to these folks that James is talking about, right? Now, again, James he's not agreeing with this, right? He's just saying, he's setting up a dialectic, and then he's going to make his comments on it. Okay. All this strikes one as healthy, even when expressed, as it is by Clifford, with rather too much loud emotion in the voice. When it comes to our beliefs, free will and simple wishing do seem to be only fifth wheels to the coach, meaning they're, useless. It's a fifth wheel. You don't need a fifth wheel on a car. You need four, and that's good. That's all you need. If you add a fifth wheel, it doesn't really do anything. Yet if anyone inferred from this that after wish and will and sentimental preference have taken wing, intellectual insight is what remains, or that pure reason is what then settles our opinions, he would be just as directly flying in the teeth of the facts. Right? So he's saying that, in cases where we do have wish and will and sentimental preference, in cases where, as a matter of fact, we do have preferences. We do wish things were a certain way, that we can just get rid of all that stuff and only, use pure reason or intellectual insight to decide what's true and what's false and what we should believe. That's not possible. It's just not possible. It is only in our already dead hypothesis that our willing nature can't bring to life again. It is only our already dead hypothesis that our willing nature cannot bring to life again. But what has made them dead for us is mostly a previous antagonistic action of our willing nature. When I say willing nature, I don't mean only deliberate volitions that may have set up habits of belief that we cannot now escape from. I mean all such contributors to belief as fear and hope, prejudice and passion, imitation and partisanship, the circumpressure of our caste and set. So circumpressure is just like a made-up word, according to, he does this, he likes to, but it means like, the pressure from the circumference around our group, right, in which we are embedded, right? The circumpressure, the pressure around us, right? All that stuff. So basically our social setting influences our beliefs kind of impossibly, in a way that's impossible to avoid. As a matter of fact, we find ourselves believing things we hardly know how or why. Mr. Balfour gives this name authority to all those influences, born of the intellectual climate that make hypotheses possible or impossible, alive or dead for us. Here in this lecture room, we all of us believe in molecules and the conservation of energy, in democracy and necessary progress, in Protestant Christianity, and the duty of fighting for the doctrine of the immortal Monroe. So he's talking about the Monroe Doctrine, which, that no European power should ever be allowed to take hold of any part of the Americas, right? That's the Monroe Doctrine, by President Monroe. Right? And all for no reasons worthy of the name, right? So we believe plenty of stuff, a whole lot, maybe even most of what we believe, without the approval of logic or reason or our intellect. We just believe things because, they're just around us, and that's just what we believe, right? We see into these matters with no more inner clearness, and probably with much less, than any disbeliever in them might possess. His unconventionality would probably have some grounds to show for its conclusions. But for us, what makes sparks shoot from them and light up our sleeping storehouses of faith is not insight, but the prestige of opinions. For 99.9% of us, our reason is quite satisfied if it can find a few arguments that we can use for our credulity is criticized by someone else. Couldn't use if our credulity is criticized by somebody else, right? So we grow up surrounded by beliefs that we're sort of just given, and that we can't really escape from. They're just sort of around us. And, if we find a few arguments that support them throughout the course of our lives, usually that's good enough, right? As long as the arguments can keep our beliefs that we already have, that we've inherited from our environments, as long as we have arguments that can support them against, whatever arguments might be given against them, as long as we have arguments that can do the job to protect us and allow us to maintain those beliefs, we're good. We're good, right? For 99.9% of us. Our faith in someone else's faith. Our faith is faith in someone else's faith. And in the greatest matters, this is usually the case. For instance, our belief in truth itself, that there is a truth, and that our minds and it are made for each other, what is that but a passionate affirmation of desire in which our social system backs us up? We want to have a truth. We want to believe that our experiments and studies and discussions must continually move us closer to it. And on this battle line, we agree to fight out our thinking lives. All right, so this is a classic statement of an idea in American pragmatism, one of the big important ones, which is a general skepticism of truth as a value in philosophy. The idea that there is an absolute unchanging truth that we have access to, and that we can have access to, that we can learn, that we can understand, and that we can, our minds are made for it and it is made for our minds, right? That we have access to the truth. Pragmatists are generally skeptical of this idea, and here James is sort of expressing a classic pragmatist position here, skepticism about the truth, right? But if an extreme skeptic asks us how we know all this, can our logic find a reply? No, certainly it cannot. It is just one volition against another. We are willing to base our lives on a trust or assumption which the skeptic does not care to make. right? So the idea that there is a truth out there is, according to James and the other pragmatists as well, it's a fiction, right? It's a desire. It's a postulate. It's something that we just sort of invent, and that we want to be true. That that our beliefs are correct. That our beliefs accurately capture the truth. That whole paradigm is something we just sort of made up, and there's no good reason to accept it. In fact, there's no good reason to accept it. Of course, many people thought the pragmatists were crazy and that this is not a defensible position, but nevertheless, that's the Jamesian view that he's expressing here, and it's a classic view within the pragmatist tradition. Okay. As a rule, we disbelieve all facts and theories for which we have no use. Clifford's cosmic emotions find no use for Christian feelings. Huxley belabors the bishops because there is no use for sacerdotalism? What on earth does that mean? Sacerdotalism. The doctrine emphasizing the role of priests in religious life. Okay, so I guess it's not all just Huxley. I think it's a different Huxley. Probably. That might have been an embarrassing error on my part. Apologies. Huxley belabors the bishops because there is no use for sacerdotalism in his scheme of life. Newman, I'm pretty sure John Henry Newman, who's the famous Catholic bishop and theologian, on the contrary, goes over to Roman Catholicism and finds all sorts of reasons to be good for staying there, because for him, a priestly system is an organic need and delight. Why do so few scientists even look at the evidence for so-called telepathy? Because they think, as a leading biologist now dead once said to me, that even if such a thing were true, scientists ought to band together to keep it suppressed and concealed. It would undo the uniformity of nature and all sorts of other things without which scientists cannot carry on their pursuits. But if this same man had been shown something that he, as a scientist, might do with telepathy, he might have not only examined the evidence, but even found it good enough, right? So in the abstract, telepathy to a scientist is bad. But if I came along and said, hey, telepathic, you can, figure out, you're telepathic now, you can figure out what that guy is thinking over there. If that was an option, it'd be like, oh, okay, let's study this, right? That's what James is saying. This very law, which the logicians would impose upon us, if I may give the name logicians to those who would rule out the willing part of our nature, is based on nothing but their own natural wish to exclude all elements for which they, as professional logicians, can find no use. Right? So the idea is that even in matters that claim to be purely logical or factual, there is a very real wish or desire that the world be a certain way underneath it. Right? So this idea that we must do things only logically, that's beneath the must do things logically, is not itself logical. Right? That's the idea. Even then, our non-intellectual nature does influence our convictions. Right? That's the non-intellectual nature, right? The volition, the desire. These are the feelings and acts of will that run before belief, and others that come after it. And it's only the latter that come too late to make any difference. And they are not too late when the previous work of feelings has been already in their own direction. In the latter case, Pascal's argument, instead of being powerless, seems to be conclusive, the last stroke needed to complete our faith in masses and holy water. The state of things is evidently far from simple, and pure insight and logic, whatever they might do ideally, are not the only things that really produce our creeds. Right? So, even if it would be nice if we could settle things logically, in fact, we can't. And even though if it would be nice that we don't have any preferences for the way the world is or any desires about how things should be, in fact, we do. We do have those. And we just have to get used to it. Our next duty, having recognized this mixed up state of affairs, is to ask whether it is simply blameworthy and pathological, or whether, on the contrary, we must treat it as a normal element in making up our minds. Right? Is it a bad thing, like blameworthy and pathological, that we have, volition and illogical, illogical motivations for, even our strongest logical convictions? Is that a problem and we have to do something about it? Or, on the contrary, we must treat it as a normal element in making up our minds? The thesis I defend, briefly stated, is this: the feeling and wanting side of our nature not only lawfully may, but must decide an option between propositions if it is a genuine option that cannot be decided on intellectual grounds. For to say, under such circumstances, do not decide, but leave the question open, is itself a decision, just like deciding yes or no, and it involves the same risk of losing the truth. I hope that this thesis, thus abstractly expressed, will soon become quite clear, but first I must engage in a bit more preliminary work. Right, so this is the thesis, abstractly stated, with a bit more terminology that he's been developing. Right, and basically, inspiration from the Rush song. I forget the name of it, but it's got the line, "If you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice." Right, that's what he's at here. Right, that's what he's saying here. Right, do not decide, but leave the question open, is itself a decision. So there you go. Rush is quoting William James, but I mean, I'm sure William James isn't the first person to think of that either. Right, and he's saying that, if we have a genuine option that cannot be decided on intellectual grounds, meaning like we don't have enough evidence to decide one way or the other, which sometimes we do, right? Sometimes we do have enough evidence to decide one way or the other, right? Like the sky is blue, not, gray. Sometimes it's gray, sometimes it's blue, sometimes it's green, sometimes it's every color of the rainbow. Maybe the sky is blue is not a good example. I don't know. I have good evidence that I'm 6'3", right? Very often we believe things like that. The bus will come at 12:30, right? That's enough on intellectual grounds for us to decide that. But sometimes it's unclear. Right? Should I go to college? Right? What's the evidence for that? Right? And he's saying in cases where we do have to make decisions, right, where we have a genuine option with two live hypotheses, that is momentous and that is forced, right? That's what a genuine option is. Remember, three things: live hypotheses, forced upon us, right? It's not avoidable, and it's momentous, meaning it's not trivial, right? So if it's a genuine option, meaning it satisfies those three conditions, and it cannot be decided on intellectual grounds, then we have to decide using the feeling and wanting side of our nature. Right. So there you go. Okay. Good stuff. All right, notice that for the purposes of this discussion, we are on dogmatic ground. I mean ground that entirely sets aside systematic philosophical skepticism. We are deliberately choosing to postulate that there is truth, and it is the destiny of our minds to attain it, though the skeptic would not postulate this. So we part company from him absolutely at this point. Right? So he's saying, I'm not going totally skeptical here. Right? I'm not accepting like crazy radical skepticism. Right? I'm saying that I'm assuming that there is a truth, and we can either know it or not. Right? So I'm not going totally skeptical here. So we part company from him absolutely at this point. But the faith that truth exists and our minds can find it can be held in either of two ways: the empiricist way and the absolutist way, right? So we can believe that, truth exists either in an empiricist way or an absolutist way. The absolutists about this say that not only can we attain to knowing truth, but we can know when we have done so. Right? yeah, so we can attain truth, and we know when we've got the truth, right? So it's very optimistic about the possibility of knowing truth, right? So Descartes, for example, is an absolutist. When he knows when he's got it right, when the idea is clear and distinct, right? Right, or rationalists rather than absolutists might be the maybe James is being a little pejorative here by saying absolutists instead of rationalists. While the empiricists think that although we may attain it, we cannot infallibly know when we have done so. To know is one thing, and to know for certain that we know is another. Okay, this is great. So if you've watched my Descartes videos, right, on the meditations, Descartes is obsessed with, he's what we might call an infallibilist about knowledge, meaning that we don't really know something unless we cannot doubt it at all. So his condition, his standard for knowing something is that it is unable to be doubted, right? It cannot be doubted. It cannot be, it's infallible, right? Where James is saying that, empiricists, and Descartes is definitely one of these absolutists for that reason, right? If I can doubt it, I don't know it for sure, and if I don't know it for sure, then I don't absolutely know it. That's Descartes, right? Whereas the empiricists think that, well, what can I know reasonably based on the best available evidence? Because there's some stuff I know with if I have, 99% certainty of something, I could say that I know it. Even if there's a very, very small chance that I'm wrong, it's still okay for me to say that I know that thing. Right? And this is a great way to put it, right? To know is one thing, and to know for certain that we know is another. One may hold the first to be possible without the second. So the empiricists and the absolutists, although neither is a skeptic in the usual philosophical sense of the word, show very different degrees of dogmatism in their lives. Right? So, yeah, so he's saying that absolutists are dogmatic. Right? If we look at the history of opinions, we see that the empiricist tendency has largely prevailed in science, while in philosophy the absolutist tendency has dominated. Right, so the debate between the empiricists and the rationalists during the early modern period, he's saying, sort of branched off and followed. Empiricism led to science, and absolutism or rationalism led to more and more philosophy. And he's going to, leading to Kant, pure absolutist, dogmatic rationalism, and eventually to Hegel as well, you might say. Whoops. Sorry about that noise. Right. We see that the empiricist tendency has largely prevailed in science, and that's true, right? How do we do science? Well, we go out and study the world. We do experiments. We try and figure out what's the best, which hypothesis has the most or the best support, right? Things like that. The typical sort, and the absolutist tendency has dominated in philosophy. Okay. The typical sort of happiness that philosophers deliver has mainly consisted in each successive school's or system's conviction that it had reached absolute certitude. Other philosophies are collections of opinions, mostly false. My philosophy gives standing ground forever. Right? This is what the systematic, dogmatic philosophers say. Who does not recognize in this the keynote of every system worthy of the name? So, in the history of philosophy, especially Western philosophy since Descartes, philosophy is all about systems, right? So there's an Aristotelian system of philosophy. There's a Cartesian system. There's an empiricist system, right? Where philosophers try to give an account of everything, right? It's systematic. It all hangs together without contradiction and explains every facet of our life, right? That's what philosophical systems are for, right? A system, to be a system at all, must come as a closed system, reversible in some details perhaps, but never in its essential features. Scholastic orthodoxy to which one must always go when one wishes to find things stated perfectly clearly, has beautifully elaborated this absolutist conviction in a doctrine that it calls that of objective evidence. So scholastic orthodoxy, this is like pre-Descartes. This is like scholasticism is like medieval theology / philosophy, right? Where, especially since the time of the reintroduction of Aristotle into monasteries in the Christian world, you get scholastic orthodox philosophy, where it's basically all the philosophy that's happening in monasteries, in centers of learning, where you have a bunch of monks who don't do anything all day but think about God and come up with reasons for arguments for the existence of God. Lots of representatives there. There's a big, it's a very long and storied and fascinating history, but scholasticism is responsible for formalizing a lot of the tools that the modern philosophers, starting with Descartes and on through Locke and Hume and Leibniz and Spinoza and so on, would use in developing their own systems. So he's talking about, here's one great contribution called objective evidence. If, for example, I cannot doubt that I now exist before you, that two exist, or I now exist before you, that 2 is less than 3, and that if all men are mortal, then I am mortal too, it is because these things shine in my intellect irresistibly. The final ground of this objective evidence possessed by certain propositions is I'm not going to read the Latin, the matching of our intellect to things. The adaequatio intellectus nostri cum re. Right. So there you go. Right. So these, again, this is like Descartes certainty, right? Cartesian certainty, right? These are irresistible to our intellect. Right. The certitude that it brings involves these things, right? On the part of the truth in question, and aptitudinem ad extorquendum certum assensum. On the part of the truth in this question, a power to compel assent. Right? Okay, we could just say that, buddy. We don't have to use Latin. On the side of the subject, it gives a quiet rest in the knowledge. I'm not reading that Latin. When one has mentally received something that leaves no possibility of doubt, right? So there's no possibility of doubt. You can have a quiet rest in the knowledge, right? And in the whole transaction, nothing operates but the entitas ipsa of the object and the entitas ipsa of the mind. I don't know what that means. We slouchy modern thinkers don't like talking in Latin. Indeed. Indeed, we don't like talking in set terms at all, but our own state of mind is very much like this. In other words, like the one captured by those Latin phrases whenever we uncritically abandon ourselves. You believe in objective evidence, and so do I. Of some things we feel that we are certain. We know, and we know that we know. There is something that gives a click inside us, a bell that strikes 12, when the hands of our mental clock have swept the dial and met at the top. The greatest empiricists among us are empiricists only on reflection. When left to their instincts, they dogmatize like infallible popes. When the Cliffords tell us how sinful it is to be Christians on such insufficient evidence, insufficiency is really the last thing they have in mind. For them, the evidence is absolutely sufficient, only it is evidence against Christianity. They believe so completely in an anti-Christian order of the universe that, for them, there is no living option. Christianity is a dead hypothesis from the start. All right, so now he's sort of suggesting that the people who say, well, now he's directly suggesting that people who, profess to only live in accordance with the certitude of logic are actually being picky and choosy about what they want to be absolutely certain of and what they can tolerate less than absolute certainty about. But now, since we are all such absolutists by instinct, what ought we in our role as students of philosophy to do about that fact? Shall we espouse and endorse it, or shall we treat it as a weakness of our nature from which we must, if possible, free ourselves? right, so this is a question that was at the beginning of the section, right? Is this something we need to get over, or is it something that we need to sort of accept and live with, right? Is it something that we need to erase or embrace? Shall we espouse and endorse it, or shall we treat it as a weakness of our nature from which we must, if possible, free ourselves? Oh, no. Wait, yes, I was right. Okay. No, now I may have misspoken there. All right. Well, maybe this doesn't connect directly. I'd have to think more. But right, are we absolutists by instinct? And William James thinks that we should try and get rid of it. We should try and not be absolutists. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense for a pragmatist to say. Okay. So on the one hand, oh, really? Maybe I just expected him to go in a different direction. Right. All right, the feeling wanting side of our nature must decide on an option if it is a genuine option that cannot be decided on intellectual grounds. Okay, so our willing side has to decide on some things, but that doesn't mean that we get to be absolutists all the time. Right. And in fact, we are absolutists quite often, and we should try to temper that, right? So we say that there is a place for wanting things to be a certain way, and for having our willing side underpin our beliefs, but it's not all the places where it typically shows up. Okay, I think that's all right. Now I'm a bit clear. I sincerely believe that B is the latter course, is the only one that we as reflective men can follow. Objective evidence and certitude are doubtless very fine ideals to play with, but where are they to be found on this moonlit and dream-visited planet? So I am myself a complete empiricist so far as my theory of human knowledge goes. I live by the practical faith that we must go on experiencing and thinking over our experience, for that's the only way our opinions can grow more true. But I believe it to be a tremendous mistake to hold any opinion, I absolutely don't care which, as if it could never be reinterpreted or corrected, and the whole history of philosophy, I think, will support me in this. There is only one unshakably certain truth. It's the truth that even extreme skepticism leaves standing, namely that the present phenomenon of consciousness exists. That, however, is the bare starting point of knowledge, the mere admission of stuff to be philosophized about. The various philosophies are merely attempts to say what this stuff really is, and if we go to our libraries, what disagreement we discover. Where is a certainly true answer found, apart from the abstract propositions of comparison, such as 2 and 2 are the same as 4, propositions that tell us nothing about concrete reality? We find no proposition ever regarded by anyone as evidently certain that hasn't either been called a falsehood or at least had its truth sincerely questioned by someone else. The transcending of the axioms of geometry, not in play but in earnest, by certain of our contemporaries, and the rejection of the whole Aristotelian logic by the Hegelians are striking examples of this. Right. So he's saying that, if we just look at how much, look at all the disagreement everywhere, it seems basically impossible, if you look at the history of philosophy, to ever have the kind of certainty that an absolutist would like to have, right? So we cannot be absolutists. It's just indefensible. This is, again, a totally classic pragmatist move to make. Okay. Yeah, the Hegelians got rid of Aristotelian logic, even though everybody thought for thousands of years that Aristotelian logic was great. Although nowadays, I don't think there's too many people who prefer Hegelian to Aristotelian logic. I mean, Hegelians do, obviously, but there you go. Okay. No concrete test of what is really true has ever been agreed upon. Right, that's true, right? Is it empiricism or is it rationalism? Some mistake the criterion external to the moment of perception, putting it either in revelation, right? So revelation might be, the source of truth. The consensus genitum, right? The agreement of the people. Maybe, what everybody agrees upon. That's what's true. The instincts of the heart, or the systemized experience of the race, right? Of humankind, right? Others make the moment of perception its own test, right? And this goes back to name it, the present phenomenon of consciousness exists, right? This is basically he's sort of suggesting that, I think therefore I am is right, or that I only exist insofar as I'm thinking is correct, right? And this is Descartes. You should go watch my Descartes Meditation 2 video where we talk about this argument. He just disagrees with everything that follows from it, from Descartes' idea, right? All we have is the present. That's what he's saying. And that's kind of what Descartes is saying too. We all we have is the present moment. That's all we have right now. And he's saying that some people, when they're trying to understand the truth of what's in the present moment, will point to something about some outside condition of how the present moment came to us, whether it was by revelation or people told us, or, the instincts, or, systematized science or whatever, right? Others make the moment of perception its own test. For example, Descartes, with his clear and distinct ideas guaranteed by the veracity of God. Reid with his common sense, and Kant with his forms of synthetic judgment a priori. These are just other, standards throughout the years that have been offered as evidence or as conditions for objective, absolute certainty and knowledge. Other standards for objective proof have been used, such as the inconceivability of the opposite, the capacity to be verified by sense, the possession of complete organic unity or self-relation, and so on. The much-lauded objective evidence is never triumphantly there. It is a mere aspiration, marking the infinitely remote ideal of our thinking life. To claim that certain truths now have it is simply to say that when you think them true, that they are true, that their evidence is objective. Otherwise, it is not. But one's conviction that the evidence one goes by is of the real objective brand is only one more subjective opinion added to the lot. For what a contradictory array of opinions have been claimed to have objective evidence and absolute certitude. Then he gives a bunch of, classic dichotomies in the history of philosophy that have been, people who believe them with absolute certainty, and then people on the other side came and doubt that and believe the opposite with absolute certainty, right? The world is rational through and through, or its existence is an ultimate brute fact. That there is a personal God, or that a personal God is inconceivable. That there is an extra-mental physical world immediately known, that the mind can only know its ideas. This is like a Berkeleyan, this is like an idealism debate, right? This is a theism debate, that the world is rational through and through, or its existence is just a brute fact. This is determinism versus free will. A moral imperative exists. Moral obligation is only an upshot of desires, right? So this is about moral objectivity. A permanent mental substance exists in everyone, or there are shifting states of minds, right? So this is about the rationalist versus empiricist debate of whether or not there are innate ideas. There is an endless chain of causes, or there is an absolute first cause, right? This is an argument about first cause. An eternal necessity, or there is freedom. There's a purpose in life, or there's no purpose. There is a primal one, or a primal many. There's a universal continuity, or is there an essential discontinuity in things? Is there infinity, or is there not? There is indeed nothing that someone hasn't thought absolutely true, while his neighbor regarded it as absolutely false. There you go. And not an absolutist among them seems ever to have considered that the trouble may all the time be essential, and that the intellect, even with truth directly in its grasp, may have no infallible way of knowing whether or not it is truth. And when one remembers that the most striking practical application to life of the doctrine of objective certitude has been the conscientious labors of the Holy Office of the Inquisition, which notoriously tortured people for not believing what the inquisitors thought true, one feels less tempted than ever to lend the doctrine a respectful ear. Right? So, if you look at the history of how many times we've changed our minds about stuff, it becomes really hard to believe that we're ever going to be right absolutely about any of this stuff. But please observe that when, as empiricists, we give up the doctrine of objective certitude, we aren't giving up the quest for or hope of truth itself. We still pin our faith on its existence and still believe that we gain an ever better position towards it by systematically continuing to accumulate experiences and to think. What makes us so different from the scholastic is the way we are facing. The strength of the scholastic system lies in the principles, the origin, the terminus a quo, the Latin for starting point, of his thought. For us, the strength is in the outcome, the upshot, the terminus ad quem, endpoint. We decide on the basis not of where it comes from, but of where it leads to. An empiricist doesn't care what quarter a hypothesis comes to him from. He may have acquired it by a fair means or by foul. Passion may have whispered or accident suggested it. But if the total drift of his thinking continues to confirm it, that is what he means by its being true. Right. So this is a good statement again of like classic pragmatist thinking of it's not about having the right logical deductions absolutely and following one absolutely certain proposition to the next absolutely certain proposition, because that's just hopeless, because there's no such thing as absolutely certain propositions. Instead, it's about believing something and then gaining evidence that it's true and having it confirmed time and time again every time we check, and believing it to be true and knowing it to be true based on the repeated confirmation, right? So every time I measure myself, I'm 6'3", right? I check fairly regularly, right? I'm 6'3". If I have recent evidence that I'm 6'3", then I believe that I'm 6'3". Might it be possible that I'm 6.31526847777 repeating? Maybe. And maybe I don't actually have a height absolutely, because my height changes maybe within the bounds of 6'3". But if I were to say I don't really know that I'm 6'3" because I don't have that level of certainty, that would be weird. And that's what James is saying. One more point, small but important, and our preliminaries are done, right? So this is all just like preliminary. So like the essay doesn't begin till here, right? One more point, small but important, and our preliminaries are done. There are two ways of looking at our duty in the matter of opinion, and they are entirely different, but the theory of knowledge seems hitherto to have shown very little concern for the difference. We must know truth, and we must avoid error. These are our first and great commandments as would-be knowers. But they are not two ways of expressing one commandment. They are two separable laws. It may happen that when we believe the truth A, we escape, as an incidental consequence, believing the falsehood B. But it hardly ever happens that by merely disbelieving B, we necessarily believe A. We may, in escaping B, fall into believing other falsehoods, C or D, just as bad as B, or we may escape B by not believing anything at all, not even A. Right? So avoiding falsehoods is different from believing truth. Believe truth, shun error. These, we see, are two significantly different laws, and by choosing between them, we may give our whole intellectual life one color rather than another. We may regard the pursuit of truth as paramount, the avoidance of error as secondary, or we may instead treat the avoidance of error as more imperative and let truth take its chance. Clifford, in the instructive passage I have quoted, urges us to take the latter course. Believe nothing, he tells us, keep your mind in suspense forever, rather than by closing it on insufficient evidence, incur the awful risk of believing lies. Right, so the guy before, right, Clifford with his crazy like scientific, we can only believe stuff that belief is desecrated when it's given to unproved and unquestioned statements, right? That guy, James is saying that guy seems to believe only in avoiding error, right? Keep your mind in suspense forever rather than close it on insufficient evidence, and by doing so incur the awful risk of believing lies. Right? That's what Clifford believes. You, on the other hand, may think that the risk of being in error is a very small matter when compared with the blessings of real knowledge, and be ready to be deceived many times in your investigation rather than postpone indefinitely the chance of guessing true. I myself find it impossible to go with Clifford, but we must remember that these feelings about our duty regarding truth or error are only expressions of the feeling and desiring side of our nature. Right? So that's pretty cool, right? This is a good one, right? He's saying that, this choice between believe truth and shun error, when we decide like which one of these do we want to care about more, believe the truth to the best of our ability, or shun error to the best of our ability. Because if we just try to avoid error at all costs, we might not believe anything, right? So there's a choice to be made here, and it's not clear which one is better. And in fact, whichever one we choose is a product of the willing and feeling and desiring side of our nature. Biologically considered, our minds are as ready to grind out falsehoods as truth, and someone who says better go without belief forever than believe a lie merely shows the dominance of his own horror of becoming a dupe. He may be critical of many of his desires and fears, but this fear he slavishly obeys. He cannot imagine anyone questioning its binding force. For my part, I also have a horror of being duped, but I believe being duped is not the worst that can happen to a man in this world. So Clifford's exhortation has to my ears an extravagantly fanciful sound. It is like a general telling his soldiers that it is better to keep out of the battle forever than to risk a single wound. That is not how victories are gained over enemies or over nature. Our errors are surely not such awfully solemn things. In a world where we are so certain to incur them in spite of all our caution, a certain lightness of the heart seems healthier than this excessive nervousness concerning them. At any rate, it seems the fittest thing for the empiricist philosopher. Okay. So that was all preliminary. Right? That was all just setup. And we are a little over halfway through the essay, or through the whole thing. And the essay is just the following 5 pages left, because the last page is pretty short. Okay. So let's just get through it. So hopefully, now that we've done all that setup, and we've learned a whole lot about pragmatism and empiricism and where William James fits in the in the grand scheme of the history of philosophy, we can understand the essay a bit more clearly. That's the hope. Let's see. And now, after all this introduction, yeah, you ain't kidding, let us go straight at our question. I have said, and now repeat, that not only does the feeling and desiring side of our nature influence us in our opinions, but there are some options between opinions in which this influence must be regarded as an inevitable and also a lawful determinant of our choice. I fear here that some of you, my hearers, will begin to scent danger and to be on your guard against me. You have indeed had to admit as necessary 2 first steps dictated by what we want. We must think so as to avoid being deceived, and we must think so as to gain truth. But you will probably think that the surest path to those ideal upshots is from now onwards to take no step further dictated in that way. I don't really get this one. Right, so he's just hedging. He's hedging his audience. He's saying, don't get off the train yet. Yeah, okay. Well, we'll just keep going. Well, of course, I agree as far as the facts will allow. Wherever the option between losing truth and gaining it is not momentous, we can throw away the chance of gaining truth and save ourselves from any chance of believing falsehood by not making up our minds at all until objective evidence has come. Oh, okay, so he's saying, right, so, so we have to choose between pursuing truth or avoiding error, sure. But most of the time, we don't actually have to make that choice. That's what we say. Most of the time, we don't have to choose between those two things. That's the objection, right? And William James is saying, yes, correct, right? In scientific question, this is almost always the case. And even in human affairs in general, there is seldom such an urgent need for action that it is better to have a false belief to act on than to have no belief at all. Law courts, indeed, have to decide on the best evidence attainable for the moment, because a judge's duty is to make laws as well as to ascertain it. And, as a learned judge once said to me, few cases are worth spending much time on. The great thing is to have them decided on any acceptable principle and got out of the way. That's a good attitude for a judge. But it is obvious that in our dealings with objective nature, we are recorders of the truth, not makers of it. And in this activity, it would be wholly out of place to make decisions merely for the sake of deciding promptly and getting on to the next business. Throughout the breadth of physical nature, facts are what they are quite independently of us. And there's seldom any such hurry about them that we need to think about the risks of being deceived by believing a premature theory. The questions here are always trivial options. The hypotheses are hardly living, at any rate not living for us spectators, and the choice between believing truth and believing falsehood is seldom forced. The attitude of skeptical balance is therefore the wise one if we want to escape mistakes. What difference does it make to most of us whether we have or don't have a theory of X-rays? Whether we believe or don't believe in mental stuff. He's talking about dualism, right? Do or don't have a belief about the causality of conscious states, right? How mental phenomenon can influence the body, right? Physical world. It makes no difference. Such options are not forced on us. On every account, it is better not to settle them with a choice, but still keep weighing reasons for and against them with an unbiased hand. Of course, I am speaking here of the purely judging mind. For the purposes of discovery, such even-handedness is less highly recommendable, and science would be far less advanced than she is if the passionate desires of individuals to get their own faiths confirmed had been kept out of the game. See, for example, the sagacity of that Herbert Spencer and August Weismann now on display in their famous controversy over the inheritance of acquired characteristics. On the other hand, if you want an absolute duffer of an investigation, you must take the man who has no interest whatever in the results. He's the warranted incapable, the positive fool. The most useful investigator, because the most sensitive observer, is always the one whose eager interest in one side of the question is balanced by an equally keen nervousness lest he become deceived. Okay, so he's kind of like arguing for like bias in science. Or at least interest. He's saying like the best science is done by people who actually care about the problems they're studying, which is weird, right? Because we want science to be unbiased, yeah. But on the other hand, we also want people who actually care about the results doing the work. So that's what he's saying. That's a bit weird, right? And I mean, whether or not that's an ideal is one question, but it's certainly the way it is, right? The best science is done by the people who care about it the most, right? If you want to do really good work on AI right now, you better be interested in AI. If you're not interested in it, you're not going to be good at it, right? So that's just like a fact, but also it goes against the idea that science should be like objective and not based in our interests or biases, right? Science has organized this nervousness, right, the nervousness about being wrong, into a regular technique. It is the so-called method of verification. And she has fallen so deeply in love with this method that she may even be said to have stopped caring for the truth by itself. It is only the truth as technically verified that interests her. And he's personifying science as a woman, right? The truth of truths might come in merely affirmative form, and she would decline to touch it. Such a truth as that, she might repeat with Clifford, would be stolen in defiance of her duty to mankind. But human passions are stronger than technical rules. As Pascal says, the heart has its reasons which reason doesn't know. The umpire of this game, the abstract intellect, may care about nothing but its bare rules, but usually each of the concrete players who provide him with the materials to judge of is in love with some pet live hypothesis of his own. Let us agree, however, that in any case where there is no forced option, the dispassionately judicial intellect with no pet hypothesis ought to be our ideal, since it at least saves us from being duped. Right? So he's saying that, when we're not dealing with forced options, sure. Right? Sure. Suspend judgment, avoid being duped, right? You don't have to commit to any hypothesis that comes across, right? Or you don't even have to make a decision about just any old hypothesis that comes your way. In those cases, sure, let's try to avoid being duped. But very often, we can't. The next question arises. Don't our speculative questions have forced options buried in them somewhere? And can we, as men who may care at least as much about positively gaining truth as about merely escaping dupery, always safely wait until the compelling evidence arrives? Right? So can't we, right? So if we're saying that, look, we, even if it seems like many scientific questions aren't urgent because they don't matter, and furthermore, that when people do study these questions and get us closer to the truth, they usually do care, right? They have the willing, desiring part of them motivating their ideas and their actions. Right? We can grant that, but isn't there force somewhere buried in there, right? Right, and can't we always just wait until compelling evidence arrives? It seems a priori improbable that the truth should be as precisely adjusted to our needs and powers as would make that a safe policy. In the great boarding house of nature, the cakes and the butter and the syrup seldom come out so even and leaves the plates so clean. Indeed, we would view them with scientific suspicion if they did, right? So he's saying we can't only get invested in scientific questions when we feel like it, right? I mean, there have to be some situations, some scientific questions where we have to make up our mind, right? Where we have to decide on something, right? Surely some questions. Where are those questions, right? Because in cases where, we don't have that sort of pressure, right? Sure, suspend judgment. Don't get duped. Don't be, don't be misled. Don't believe a lie, right? If you don't have to, right? But surely, not every question gives us that sort of leeway to suspend our judgment. Sometimes we have to make a decision. And James starts talking about that now, right? Moral questions immediately present themselves as questions whose solution cannot wait for empirical proof. A moral question does not ask what exists that our senses could detect, but what is good, or what would be good if it did exist. Science can tell us what exists, but to compare the worth of what exists with that of what doesn't exist, we must consult not science, but what Pascal calls our heart. Right? When science lays it down that the supreme goods for man are the endless establishing of fact and the correction of false belief, she is consulting her heart. Yeah, so that's right? So again, pointing at Russell here, right? When Russell says that, the supreme goods for man is to believe what is true and only what is true, that's based on what Russell is feeling. There's no scientific principle for that belief. Challenge that statement, and science can only repeat it oracularly, meaning as if it were an oracle, right, as a proclamation, or else prove it by showing that such establishing and correction brings man all sorts of other goods which his heart chooses, right? Or else to prove it that by believing it, all this good stuff happens, right? Which is not logical either. The question of having some moral beliefs or not having any is decided by our will. Are our moral preferences true or false? Or are they only biological phenomena, making things good or bad for us, but in themselves neither good nor bad? How can your pure intellect decide that question, right? Whether moral preferences are true or false, or whether there is moral objectivity, right? If your heart doesn't want a world of morality, your head will surely never make you believe in one. Mephistophelian skepticism, and this goes back to Faust, Mephisto, who refuses to believe anything. Mephisto's skepticism indeed will satisfy the head's play instincts much better than any rigorous idealism can. Some men, even at the student age, are so naturally cool-hearted that moralistic hypotheses is never really alive for them, right? Some people are just so, cynical that they don't even believe that objective morality exists as a live option or as a live hypothesis. And their supercilious presence at the hot young moralist will always feel strangely ill at ease, right? The appearance of knowingness is on their side, and the appearance of naivete and gullibility is on his. Yet in his inarticulate heart, he clings to the idea that he is not a dupe, and that there is a realm in which, as Emerson says, all their wit and intellectual superiority is no better than the cunning of a fox. Moral skepticism can be no more refuted or proved by logic than intellectual skepticism can. When we stick to the view that there is objective truth of either kind, we do this with our whole nature and resolve to stand or fall by the results. The skeptic, with his whole nature, adopts the doubting attitude. But which of us is the wiser? Omniscience only knows. Right, so he's just saying that he's saying that the debate between moral realism and an anti-realist view of morality is intractable, and it's decided only by people's feelings, right? Whether you feel that there's objective morality or not. There's reason to disagree with that, but that's what he's saying, and he says he's giving the same argument that he gave with the intractable disagreements in philosophy. That there might not be a right answer, at least one that can give us absolute certainty, and one that is logically decidable, or it can be decided by logic. Turn now from these wide questions of good to a certain class of narrower questions of fact, questions concerning personal relations, states of mind between one man and another. For example, do you like me or not? Whether you do or don't depends in countless cases on whether I meet you halfway, assuming that you must like me and showing you trust and expectation. In such cases, what makes your liking come is my previous faith that your liking for me exists. Okay? But if I stand aloof and refuse to budge an inch until I have objective evidence of your liking me, until you have done something that is apt, as the absolutists say, to compel my assent, 10 to 1 you won't ever like me. How many women's hearts are vanquished by the mere optimistic insistence of some man that they must love him? He won't consent to the hypothesis that they can't. In these cases, the desire for a certain kind of truth brings about that truth's existence. And so it is in innumerable cases of other sorts. Right. So he's saying that I guess he's saying he's giving this example of guys who are just insistent towards the girls of their dreams that you must love me, you must love me. Guys who are obsessed with a girl, right? Eventually win them over. Wouldn't give this advice today. Sign of the times. This is an old piece of writing. It's from long ago. But he's giving it as an example of, if you believe something enough, eventually you make it true, right? And he's just giving examples of that. The desire for a certain kind of truth brings about that truth's existence, right? That's the idea. That's what all these are supposed to be examples of. The only one who gains promotions, gifts, appointments is the man in whose life they are seen to play the part of live hypotheses, right? It's about, I guess this is like about manifestation. Like, you got to manifest your goal. These goals have to seem like, these outcomes have to seem like they're live hypotheses to you. Like I'm going to get that job. That job could be mine. And that's how you get the job, right? Who sacrifices other things for their sake before they have come, and who takes risks for them in advance. His faith acts on the powers above him as a claim and creates its own verification. Right? So there you go. It's very optimistic. Now, he's not saying that everything works this way, right? He's not an idiot. He's just saying that very often, people's desires for things to be a certain way precede them actually being that way, right? People have goals. They say, I'm going to, beat that marathon time, and then they do, right? And the fact that they wanted to beat that marathon time is why they ended up doing it. A social organism of any sort, large or small, is what it is because each member does his duty with a trust that the other members will do theirs. Wherever a desired result is achieved by the cooperation of many independent persons, its existence as a fact is a pure consequence of the faith in one another of those who are immediately concerned. A government, an army, a commercial system, a ship, a college, an athletic team, all exist in this condition, without which nothing is achieved. Indeed, nothing is even attempted. A whole train of passengers, individually brave enough, will be looted by a few highwaymen, simply because the robbers can count on one another, while each passenger fears that if he tries to resist, he will be shot before anyone backs him up. If we believed that the whole carful would rise at once with us, each of us would rise, and train robbing would never even be attempted. So there you go. If we all watched each other's back, crime wouldn't exist. That's optimistic there, Willie. So there are cases where a fact cannot come at all unless there is a previous faith that it will come. And where faith in a fact can help create the fact, to say that faith running ahead of scientific evidence is the lowest kind of immorality into which thinking being can fall would be an insane logic. And again, this is that quote from Clifford before. Yet such is the logic by which our scientific absolutists claim to regulate our lives. Right? So there you go. So he's saying, look, there's all the time we end up in situations where we have to believe something with insufficient evidence. We have to want something to be true, and then it ends up being true. This happens all the time. And to say that it never happens or that we should never do it is just ridiculous. Oh, well, sorry, I explained that as if I actually believe it. I guess I do. Maybe. In truths dependent on our personal action, then, sorry about that, faith based on desire is certainly a lawful thing, and possibly an indispensable one. But now it will be said there are all childish human cases and have nothing to do, but now it will be said these are all childish human cases and have nothing to do with great cosmic matters like the question of religious faith. Okay, so now we are almost at the end, and we're finally mentioning religious faith. So there you go. Big moment. So let us then pass on to that. Religions differ so much in their details that in discussing the religious question, we must make it very generic and broad. What then do we now mean by the religious hypothesis? Science says things are. Morality says some things are better than others. And religion says essentially two things. Right, so he's giving his definition of what religion says. Religion says, 1. The best things are the more eternal things, the overlapping things, the things in the universe that throw the last stone, so to speak, and say the final word. Charles Secretan's statement, perfection is eternal, seems to be a good way of putting this first affirmation of religion, an affirmation which obviously cannot yet be at all verified scientifically, right? Maybe someday, but this idea that the perfect things are the best, perfection is eternal, and we should focus on the things that are the most cosmic or whatever, right? Cannot verify that scientifically, but that's what religion says. And 2, we are better off even now, when we are far from finality or perfection, if we believe religion's first affirmation to be true. So we're better off if we believe the first thing. Now let us consider what the logical elements of this situation are if both branches of the religious hypothesis are really true. Right? So assume both of these things are true. Of course, we must admit that possibility at the outset. If we are to discuss the question at all, it must involve a living option. If for any of you religion is a hypothesis which cannot by any living possibility to be true, then you need to listen no further. I'm speaking only to the others. Right, so he's saying, if you don't even think that there's a chance that you can believe in religion, then, forget it. But if you think that there's a chance of believing in religion, that religion is a living hypothesis, then, here's how we need to think about it. Right? We first see that religion offers itself as a momentous option. We are supposed to gain, even now, by our belief, and to lose by our non-belief, a certain vital good. Secondly, religion is a forced option, so far as that goes. We cannot escape the issue by remaining skeptical and waiting for more light, because although if religion is untrue, we do avoid error in that way, if it is true, we lose the good by suspending judgment just as certainly as if we positively chose to disbelieve. Okay, so he's like, this is not Pascal's wager, but it's in the neighborhood, right? It's in the neighborhood. He's saying that, we do have to decide things not based on logic and reason sometimes, right? Including whether or not to believe in religion. So it's like, and that's Pascal's point. But, if we did a whole lot of work to get here to like a slightly updated, more sophisticated, better, careful version of Pascal's wager-ish, right? There's a connection. I shouldn't say that I'm not saying that William James is giving Pascal's wager. That's not true. But it's in the neighborhood. It's in the neighborhood. Right? It is as if a man were to hesitate indefinitely to ask a certain woman to marry him because he was not perfectly sure that she would prove to be an angel after he brought her home. Okay, well, sign of the times there, not endorsing that example. Would he not, by his hesitation, cut himself off from that particular angel possibility as decisively as if he married someone else? So skepticism is not avoidance of choice. It is the choice of one particular kind of risk. Better risk the loss of truth than the chance of error. That is your faith vetoer's exact position. He is actively placing his bet as much as the believer is. He is backing the field against the religious hypothesis, just as the believer is backing the religious hypothesis against the field. To preach skepticism to us as a duty until sufficient evidence for religion is to be found is thus tantamount to telling us, when we are in the presence of the religious hypothesis, that to yield to our fear of its being false is wiser and better than to yield to our hope that it is true. All right, so there you go. So it is not intellect against all passions. It is only intellect laying down its law on the basis of one passion. Right, so it's not a choice between reason and passion, right? Pascal's wager. It's a choice between two different passions, right? That's the point. And what, forsooth, establishes the supreme wisdom of this passion? Dupery for dupery. What proof is there that dupery through hope is so much worse than dupery through fear? Dupery. That's a fun word. Dupery. I, for one, can see no proof of this, and I simply refuse to obey the scientist's command to imitate his kind of option in a case where my stake is important enough to give me the right to choose my own form of risk. If religion is true, and the evidence for it is still insufficient, I don't want, by putting your extinguisher on my nature, to forfeit my one chance in life of getting on the winning side. That chance depending, of course, on my willingness to run the risk of acting as if my desire-driven need to take the world religiously might be prophetic and right. Right? Okay, so there you go, right? Like, it's not a choice between, being rational and being, irrational faith. It's actually a choice between two different irrational motives. One is a fear of being wrong, and one is a hope of being right. Right? That's the choice. That's the decision that we have to make when we're deciding whether to believe in religion or not. Right? It's not reason versus faith. It's two different kinds of faith that we're choosing between. Right? And the rest of the previous parts of the essay was just giving a bunch of examples of when. Even in processes that seem like they should be totally rational and driven by science, they are actually motivated by, by unscientific, illogical, willing and desiring parts of ourselves, right? And this decision, whether or not to believe in religion, is no different. In all of this, I am supposing that even for us who are discussing the matter, religion is a live hypothesis which may be true. To most of us, religion comes in yet another way that makes a veto on our active faith even more illogical. The more perfect and more eternal aspect of the universe is represented in our religions as having a personal form. If we are religious, the universe is no longer a mere it to us, but a thou. Right, so he's okay, so now he's talking a little bit more specifically about religion and what we gain from religion. It's not like he's not going the route of Pascal with the eternal reward of a life in heaven. He's saying, he's saying that he's going to outline some of the benefits that we get right now when we believe in religion. Okay, for instance, although in one sense we are passive parts of the universe, in another we show a curious autonomy, as if we were small active centers on our own account, and thus able to stand in a sort of personal relation with it. We feel too as if religion's appeal to us were an appeal to our own active goodwill, as if evidence for it might be forever withheld from us unless we meet the hypothesis halfway. To take a trivial illustration, just as a man who is in the company of gentlemen made no advances, asked warrant for every concession, and believed no one's word without proof, would cut himself off by such churlishness from all the social rewards that a more trusting spirit would earn, so here, someone who shut himself up in a snarging logicality and tried to make the gods extort his recognition willy-nilly, or not get it at all, might cut himself off forever from his only opportunity of making the gods' acquaintance. That's very nice. This feeling, forced on us, we know not whence, that by obstinately believing that there are gods, although not to do so would be easy both for our logic and our life, we are doing the universe the deepest service we can. Right? Nice. This seems to be part of the living essence of the religious hypothesis. If the hypothesis were true in all its parts, including this one, then pure intellectualism, with its veto on our making willing advances, would be an absurdity, and some participation of our feeling and wanting part of our nature would be logically required. So I, for one, cannot see my way to accepting the agnostic rules for truth-seeking, or willfully agree to keep my willing nature out of the game. I cannot do so for this plain reason, that a rule of thinking which would absolutely prevent me from acknowledging certain kinds of truth, even if those kinds of truth were really there, would be an irrational rule. That for me is the long and short of the formal logic of the situation, no matter what the kinds of truth might materially be. Okay, so there he goes. So that's like the main thing. Yeah, so he says that actually the decision to believe in God or not is not a choice between reason and logic and faith. It's between two different desires, right? One desire, the hope of being right, and another desire, the fear of being wrong. And he says, deciding between one or the other, you're much better off pursuing the hope of being right. And here's the reason why. You get to be friends with God. There you go. That's a big benefit. And it doesn't involve like any particular God. It doesn't require you to believe in, eternal, damnation or eternal bliss in heaven, right? None of that actually matters. You just get to be friends with God while you're here. And that's kind of cool, right? That's good. That's a good thing. So that's one thing that you gain from doing so. And actually it is a very big benefit. It is a momentous benefit. So this is where the momentous part of the option comes back, right? So there you go. And in fact, and he's saying, when he makes this analogy with, imagine somebody who never, who just never wanted to do anything in any situation socially without absolute certainty before he, shook somebody's hand or whatever. That person probably wouldn't be friends with many people, right? Same for people who are like, I won't believe in God unless I have like absolute evidence for it or whatever. You're just being a jerk and you're missing out on the chance to be friends with God, I guess. I think that's the argument here. Okay, so that's it. And then I guess this is all like sort of conclusory stuff. So we're at the end now, but a little bit further. I really don't see how this logic can be escaped, but sad experience makes me fear that some of you may still shrink from radically accepting my general thesis that we have the right to believe at our own risk any hypothesis that is alive enough to tempt our will. I suspect, however, that if this is so, it is because you have got away from the general logical point of view altogether, and are thinking, perhaps without realizing it, of some particular religious hypothesis which for you is dead. You think of the freedom to believe what we will in terms of something that is obviously a superstition. And the faith you think of is the faith defined by the schoolboy who said, faith is when you believe something that you know ain't true. I can only repeat that this is a misunderstanding. The freedom to believe can only cover living options, which the person's intellect cannot resolve by itself. All right, this is pretty profound, to be honest, yeah. And living options never seem absurdities to the person who has them to consider. So he's saying that, this is not about Christianity. This is not about the Pope. This is not about, faith. This is not about the church you grew up with. This is about, your own spiritual journey and you thinking, maybe there is something out there, right? Maybe there is a God. Maybe there is a mechanism to it all. I don't understand it, but there's something going on there. And I have the option. I could believe in it. If I wanted to, but I just don't have enough evidence, right? Whatever your conception of religion is that satisfies this very general claim, right? That it's something eternal. It's the thing in the universe that throws the last stone, that unity in all things, that whatever form it takes. Maybe it is Christianity for you, but it doesn't have to be, right? And he's saying that, this is not about one particular religion. This is only those living spiritual options that you have access to as living options, right? When I took the religious question as actual men really confront it, and when I think of all the possibilities it involves, both practically and theoretically, then this command that we put a stopper on our heart, instincts, courage, and weight, while acting pretty much as if religion were not true, until doomsday, or until such time as our intellect and senses working together may have raked in enough evidence, This seems to me the queerest idol ever manufactured in the philosophic cave. And again, idols, cave, Plato, philosophy, right? If we were scholastic absolutists, there might be more excuse for obeying that command. If we had an infallible intellect with its objective certitudes, we might feel it would be disloyal to this perfect organ of knowledge not to trust it exclusively, not to wait for its releasing word. But if we are empiricists, if we believe that no bell in us tolls to let us know for certain when truth is in our grasp, then it seems a piece of idol fantastically to preach so solemnly that we have a duty to wait for the bell. Right? If we're good empiricists and we know that, we'll never, if we give up this idea that we need absolute certainty to believe anything, then, we realize that demanding absolute certainty in the sphere of religion is just silly, right? It's just silly, right? Indeed, we may wait if we want to. I hope you don't think I'm denying that. But if we wait, we do so at our peril as much as if we believed. In either case, we act, taking our life in our hands. No one of us thought to issue vetoes to anyone else, nor should we throw around words of abuse. Rather, we ought delicately and profoundly to respect one another's mental freedom. Only then will we bring about the intellectual republic. Only then will we have that spirit of inner tolerance that is empiricism's glory, and without which all outer tolerance is soulless. Only then will we live and let live, in theoretical as well as in practical things. I began by a reference to Fitzjames Stephen. Let me end by a quotation from his Liberty, Equality, Fraternity. So he's ending with a quote from Fitzjames Stevens. What do you think of yourself? What do you think of the world? These are questions with which all must deal as it seems good to them. They are riddles of the Sphinx, and in some way or other we must deal with them. In all important transactions of life, we have to take a leap in the dark. If we decide to leave the riddles unanswered, that is a choice. If we waver in our answer, that is also a choice. But whatever choice we make it at our peril. If a man chooses to turn his back altogether on God and the future, no one can prevent him. No one can show beyond reasonable doubt that he is mistaken. If a man thinks otherwise and acts as he thinks, I don't see that anyone can prove that he is mistaken. Each person must act as he thinks best, and if he is wrong, so much the worse for him. We stand on a mountain pass in the midst of whirling snow and blinding mist, through which we get glimpses now and then of paths, glimpses that may be deceptive. If we stand still, we shall be frozen to death. If we take the wrong road, we shall be dashed to pieces. We do not certainly know whether there is any right one. What must we do? Be strong and of a good courage. Act for the best, hope for the best, and takes what comes. If death ends all, we cannot meet death better. Damn. That's pretty good. I like that. There you go. That's Billy James, The Will to Believe. What was that from? 1894. I didn't even read the year at the beginning. Billy James, Will to Believe, 1894. So there you go. Pretty cool piece. I like it. A couple, I don't know if I follow all the arguments necessarily. But I think it's a clever move. It's a clever move that, look, you have to make up your mind about whether or not you believe in God. And if you think that, you're only not believing in God because it's more rational. Sorry, I have two scare quotes. There you go. Rational. You're just kidding yourself. Because all you're doing is listening to a different sort of stubborn, non-intellectual passion compared to the one that says, yeah, probably, I don't know if there is a God, but, I hope there is one. It'd be nice. I'm going to believe it, I have some reason to believe that there's God, I look around, there's some evidence, a lot of people seem to believe in God. A lot of people who do seem happier. A lot of good seems to come from a measured and, respectable belief in some sort of religious or spiritual foundation to the universe. So, yeah, I'll roll the dice. I'll take a chance. I'll do it. No matter what specific form that may take. I think that's pretty clever. It's a good piece. Okay. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed. If you do, leave a like if you made it this far. Even if you didn't make it this far, I hope you did leave a like. And yeah, more to come. More videos like this, hopefully once a month. That's the goal. At least once a month. Maybe some more in between. All right, that's it. Have a great one.